Welcome to the Todd DeVoe Show, exploring the best ideas and lessons for leaders.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are at in this fine world. And today, I guess we're still doing it, right? I was just looking at my calendar. It looks like we're still in Earth Week. We went from Earth Day, that was created in 1970, to Earth Week. So what are you doing to help prepare our world, plant a tree or do what you're doing during Earth Week? Earth and so yeah, I love this. I actually, I'm a quasi. I should say quasi. I am into the environment. I like going outdoors. I like doing outdoor stuff. So I think being a tree hugger a little bit on my end, and so I like celebrating the idea of making Earth better, right? So that's Earth Week. So celebrate Earth Week. And what are you doing in the comments over there? Tell me what you guys are doing for Earth Week. I can tell you this weekend, my family, we are planting our spring garden. So that's what we're doing for Earth Week. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about sustainability and preparedness and readiness and all sorts of cool stuff and like how people can help each other. And I have Alicia Johnson here with me from 2 Lynchpin Road. This is her company, but she's an experienced emergency manager as well. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Todd. Thanks for having me. Morning, everyone. I'm West Coast, so it is morning here.
It is morning. Yeah, West Coast here. Yeah, just waking up, drinking my coffee, and like I say, I sometimes I wish that we could have a pre-show where people could tune in, because some of the conversations that we have prior to the show are fun. We're having a great conversation just about food sustainability and preparedness and stuff, and it was a good conversation. We could continue that a little bit, but before we do that, I want to get into who you are and why you created your organization. So tell me your backstory.
Sure. Yeah. So I started in emergency management in 2004, right after I graduated from college. I was not with a degree in emergency management, because in 2004 there weren't any degrees in emergency management. Have a background in organizational communications and political science, and really enjoyed risk communications when I was in college, and got into emergency management through the Chemical Stockpile Emergency Preparedness Program in Colorado. And now, that program is closing out, and they're one of my clients at 2 Lynchpin Road. So super excited to be working with them again. But really didn't know what emergency management was at the time, and certainly didn't know what the Chemical Stockpile Emergency Preparedness Program was, and went through the interview process, which to this day is one of the most complex interview processes I've gone through. And remember in the conversation, someone asking me what emergency management was. And I said, I paused for a moment and I thought, can I tap dance my way through this? And I was like, probably not. I should just tell the truth. And I said, I don't know. But what I do know is that this job as the public information officer has everything to do with the blue line that comes across the bottom of the TV when crisis happens. And that's the purpose of this role, is to make sure that people know what to do in the middle of a crisis. And that answer landed me the job. And I could never get out of emergency management. I kept trying to branch out in different ways, and it just did not happen. And ended up out here on the West Coast working for San Francisco Emergency Management. And then only recently, about 4 years ago, transitioned over to work with the University of California, Berkeley. And then during the pandemic, decided that I had a little bit of extra time because we were working remotely, and I'd start a consulting firm on the side.
Yeah,
so
right.
Yeah, of course, right? Everyone has extra time in a pandemic. What really struck me was that there are organizations, private sector, local governments, women-owned businesses, those who are historically marginalized, who need emergency management help. Some know it, some don't. But the importance of really just connecting with them and helping them build their business in a sustainable way, so that when crisis occurs, whether that's a pandemic or otherwise, they are resilient and have the capacity to continue to help themselves and help their communities.
Yeah, when I did I got my, same with you, I did public emergency management didn't exist in any way. Maybe it did somewhere, but not realistically where we could get to it as a degree. And so I took public administration, but I really wanted to focus on what I did on emergency management side of things. And I did my senior thesis on the Northridge, on the Northridge earthquake and the Whittier Nerves earthquake, and both of those. And what I did is I looked at who was affected, impacted. Really kind of got my interest in doing the social impacts of disaster realistically back then. And what I found is that small women-owned businesses are the hardest hit and don't recover from disasters. And normally it's because they're in the service industry, so they're doing things like beauty salons, hair salon, nail salons, service industry, things like this, where if they can't get up and running within 3-4 days, they're never going to open their doors again. And I found that amazing. And I think that's something that we can do as government to help those businesses open their doors quickly. But that's one of the things. But having you out there helping these businesses prepare and think ahead of what it is to be resilient to a disaster, I think is critical. And before the show started, we're talking about resiliency. What is your definition? Because I know it's a squishy word, which I'm kind of trying to move away from resiliency, but I'll tell you why in a second. But what is your definition of resiliency, and what does it mean to organizations?
It is a really squishy word. And, I first started in emergency management, and when you're in something, your definition of the word is pretty crisp, right? Resilience is this. And I remember sitting on a plane once going to an exercise and talking with my seatmate, who was probably, 10, 15 years older than me at the time. And she worked in education, in K through 12 education. And I was saying, I work in resilience in regards to emergency management. She's like, what? She's like, that's so interesting. I also work in resilience, but it's related to education. And I thought, oh, wait, resilience works in all these other fields. And I was like, oh my God, of course it does. But when you're in it, you kind of don't see that. So for me, the definition of resilience is the ability to bounce back quickly. And that could be from a disaster, or that could be from something else, right? It doesn't have to be from a crisis that you have some sort of ability for resilience and to kind of just regain your commitment or your strength or your direction. It also doesn't have to be resilience as a business or an organization. It could be individual or, daily. We're exercising some form of resilience. So I think that's, it's a pretty nebulous definition. As you said, it's kind of squishy. But it's that idea that you have thought ahead, you have a little bit of foresight, and you have an idea of what that takes for you to be resilient. And you're willing and able to look around for different elements of resilience. So it might not manifest itself in the form that you think it will. Resilience might take the form of a loan in a disaster, but it might also be a partnership that you weren't expecting that kind of helps you pivot and continue to increase your capability. And very quickly, before we talk a little bit more about resilience, I do want to say that, one of the most surprising statistics for me globally is that women are more likely to die in a disaster than men. And I think that global statistic cascades down into historically marginalized business owners as well, right? If you're more likely to be impacted, your business is also more likely to be impacted in a disaster. And that probably isn't necessarily a positive impact. And so knowing that going in, that you're going to have an uphill battle and you're going to need all the strength and capacity and resilience to succeed, I think is a huge part of that emergency planning and that disaster preparedness.
Absolutely. I find that statistic always interesting because looking at that and seeing like where that is, and it truly, like, I don't want to go too deep into it, but some of the nations that that study focused on, they really have some major issues, specifically with valuing the life of anybody who's not in the upper caste system, and
Yes.
it's just a lot of issues there. But yeah, you're right. It just is a a sad statistic, and it's get outside. Everybody, if you're in this business, get outside of the United States for a little bit and see how things run, and then you'll see a different appreciation for the world. When we that's the other thing too, is I actually worked with an international humanitarian group out of Canada that were working with the Islamic religion centered areas, and the interesting part about it was because they're out of Canada, because in the United States, really some areas like Myanmar stuff, like we couldn't get into to help. Working with them, they actually were able to open the doors, and they specifically focus on helping women in those Islamic countries to be able to survive after disaster. And it's tragic to see that, but yes, I agree with you that that's something that we need to be working on as the world should be looking at this. And look at what's happening over in Ukraine right now, and areas like that, women and children that are impacted by this current issue. Getting back on resilience, and this is actually a good parlay to this. Have you read Nicholas Taleb's book, Antifragile?
Yes.
Yeah, I really want.
Is there an emergency manager who hasn't read that book? If you haven't, you absolutely must read it. It's required reading for this world, for this industry in the 21st century.
I would love to move to that model. I'd love to move the idea of, because he said, okay, robustness and resilience, they're not defined enough to what he was talking about. So he coined the term antifragile. And I'm like, holy smoke, that you're absolutely right. And how do we create the anti-fragile community? I know you're working on some of that stuff, and like, what does it mean? Like, I think that's a more concrete word than resilience.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I think, one of the first steps towards creating that anti-fragile element is one, understanding it, and also I think understanding the network in which you operate, right? A lot of times in my background in local government, we often would say, okay, we can handle X, Y, and Z. Like, we can do all of these things. And then there was a certain element where you're like, well, we're not the expert in logistics. Okay, well, then we can't answer those questions. Okay, no, you're wrong. The network that we have as an organization, as a city, as a community, can answer those questions. And so we need to bring those people to the table to help us answer questions about logistics or about anything else, right? And we saw that model kind of develop during COVID, where we were really pushing private sector for innovation in relationship to vaccine development. Could we have pushed other parts of our community as well for more innovation in response to disaster and capacities? Absolutely. And I think that's where it really becomes emergency management as a more holistic approach, and using that element of foresight and saying, look, we know bad things are going to happen. We have to acknowledge that and be comfortable with saying we are a community that is at risk, or we're an organization that is at risk. Every organization is. We are not flawless. We are not, even incredibly large organizations have risk. They have entire divisions dedicated to risk. Probably the bigger you are, the more risk you have. But we also have the capacity to build, strong networks to help us overcome that and to help us become more anti-fragile. You don't become anti-fragile alone.
Right.
And I think that is a huge part of whether you're a community or an organization, a small business or a large business, recognizing that you have dependencies, and the only way you become have less risk is through, strengthening those vulnerabilities and strengthening those dependencies. Maybe you own them, maybe somebody else does, but having those conversations is really vital.
And there's two things in that. One is going back to the resilient definition, and I like using the ecology definition of where an organism, not alone, but in the ecosystem, is able to bounce back from stressors that are put on it. And I think that what we miss a lot of times and is the ecosystem, right? And our ecosystem, if we call that our community, and before the show, we're talking about how, I'm prepared. I've been in this business for a long time. I know what to do. I've taken my own gospel, if you will, as I preach it out to the residents that I work with, through certain programs and stuff. And my home is prepared for a disaster. If my home stands and it doesn't burn down, I'm going to be okay for a little bit, not for years. I don't have like a bunker or anything like that. But on the other side of it, though, is your neighbor prepared, right? And that's really an important question, because like either two things are going to happen. One is you're going to build a bunker literally around your house, and you're going to no one can come through my castle doors, and that's not sustainable, right? Or you're going to have to start helping your community, as well. And so you have to get out of that mindset as a resident, right? Even as a business, that I'm circling my wagons around my business and my city or my whatever, and I'm keeping my footballs here, and I'm only playing with my tribe, right? We're talking about the idea that there are some businesses that failed during COVID, right? Shut down, and then others expanded and thrived during this period. They found ways to work around the issues. Is it the attitude of the organization that does that, or is it luck? I mean, what do you think? What's your professional opinion on like why these businesses or individuals did better during this crisis than others?
I think that's such a great question. I want to see some research on that. I have thoughts, right? I don't know the answer. If I had to guess, I would say foresight played a huge role in that. Not necessarily we saw the pandemic coming, although if you were paying attention to the news, you did see something coming, right? But that conversation of what would a pivot look like? Where would I explore if I had more money, more time, more whatever? It doesn't even have to be the foresight around a crisis is occurring. Just what would I do that would help, branch this out? Where's my curiosity taking me as an organization, as a business owner? And then, pressing pause for a few moments during the opening days of the pandemic, and for many people, what was a very long lockdown, and saying, okay, so how would I pivot, right? Where would I go if I'm going to explore this curiosity? I think the other thing that we haven't really talked about, and this is why it's so important for historically marginalized business owners, is that you have to have some kind of reserve, some kind of cash reserve, whether that's cash or a loan or a capacity, VC investment, something where you can say, okay, I need a few days, a few weeks, a few months to figure out where I'm going to go. And that is really difficult in some sectors. It's really difficult in some organizations to be able to have that bandwidth to make that decision. And I think that's the other part of this when we talk about businesses that were able to expand versus businesses that failed or had to close their doors. A lot of that is because they did or did not have a buffer.
Right.
And sometimes you can acquire that buffer over time, and sometimes that buffer is not available to you. And so understanding that ahead of time and being able to explore options that may or may not be available to you is part of that. And maybe part of your resilience plan is, if I don't have X, Y, and Z, then I have to close my doors. And knowing that this is there's a line in the sand of what that looks like for you and for your organization, versus if I have X, A, B, and C, then I can expand and I can move forward. And just knowing those types of things ahead of time really help us move forward in a positive way.
Absolutely. And Elaine's been popping stuff up in here, and so she's resilience is getting back up in some of the with eventually goal to get back to normal operations. Right, I agree there. And I like the idea what she says down here at the bottom. She goes, I also think that those who thought outside of the box, the proverbial box, if you will, that you can't get from point A to point B in a straight line. What is another way? And you're right, sometimes you have to zigzag, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you might have expected your, the loan to come in, your parents to provide money, your VC, maybe your retirement portfolio, whatever that looks like, whatever your sources are, but those aren't available to you. And the same thing is, if you're not ready for Paycheck Protection Act to apply for that and have that capacity, then maybe you can't take advantage of it, right? And so there are lots of different options that are available to you that you have to be ready to explore.
Yeah, I was working with a firm on some stuff, and they had some large clients that didn't pay during COVID, and they said, "Hey, we'll pay you afterwards, but we just can't pay you right now." And they're like, "Oh my gosh, what are we going to do?" And it was some struggle, but yeah, you're right. And some firms can absorb that loss for a short period of time, where others can't. And let's discuss this a little bit deeper regarding people on the margins. Where again, mostly service industry, right? People, again, hairdressers, restaurants, a great example. And let's talk about restaurants here for a second. And I don't want to out anybody in the hairdressing industry, but we'll talk a little bit, some interesting stories I heard about them. Right. So restaurants, some of them were like, okay, great. We have all this stock of food that we can't necessarily cook, right? Because we can't open, we can't let anybody in. We're not really set up for takeout necessarily. Well, let's sell our friggin' groceries because people need egg and fry. I thought that was an amazing. It basically became a grocery store, and I heard stories of countless small restaurants that survived just on doing that. And I think that's one of those things that, like Elena said, is thinking outside the box instead of going, "Oh no, I have issues here. Let me sell my groceries." What do you think of that?
I think that's ingenious, right? Where you're that third party supplier and you're saying, okay, look, we have this capacity. In order for restaurant X to stay afloat, we can teach you how to make your own, I don't know, tamales, right? And that's what I would love to do. I really stink at making those. So give me the kit and I can make it happen in my kitchen, right? With my son and my husband. And I think that's a key part of this is wow, if you can help us to learn how to do it ourselves, then all of a sudden you've created a customer for life, because as soon as you do get your takeout capacity up and running, then you're like, oh yeah, I want to come back to this organization over and over and over again. Where I am in Sonoma County, a lot of outdoor dining popped up over, we don't have snow, so a lot of outdoor dining popped up over time. Many of that, those organizations have taken over parking spaces. They're not going to give them back. They're going to continue to have outdoor dining now seasonally. Till the city says, sorry, we're taking your permit away and we need that parking space, right? Which probably will never happen because it's a huge economic driver for our community. So I think it's been really interesting to me to see how especially food organizations have been able to pivot and to grow their capacity over time. Now, initially, that's not growth. That's just trying to catch yourself up. Right? You're like, oh my gosh, I'm panicking. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. But I think, long term, there is growth there. In regards to hair salons, I have heard of people, hopping on TikTok or Instagram Live and teaching or scheduling some sort of, hey, I'll give you a 30-minute tutorial on how to cut your bangs or how to cut your husband's hair, or those types of things. So it's not necessarily, it's more of a tutorial element than I'm going to cut your hair myself, right? And having that kind of conversation ahead of time. Those are quick pivots that maybe are not making ends meet necessarily, but are keeping you afloat enough that when things open up or things get back to somewhat back to normal, or you feel like you can continue to, double down on a certain thing like takeout, that you have the capacity to do that, as opposed to shutting your doors. So it's not like, oh, we're going to help you pivot immediately from A to B, but we are, giving you enough, you're getting enough bandwidth just a tiny bit of breathing room that allows you to make the pivot more fully and more concretely into whatever the new world is. And that could be from pandemic or any other crisis.
Right. You know what I find interesting in some of the hair salons? I never thought in my mind, in my wildest dreams, if I was to like make a science fiction movie about an end of the world disaster, where I think that the beauty salons and hairdressers and whatnot would go to on a, well, I guess a black market for lack of a better term. But like my mother-in-law's hairdresser said, we'll just come to your house. And, you know, we in a laundry room where we have a floor that can withstand pressures of hair.
Easily vacuumed, etc.
Right. Yeah, they just okay, and she did all of her stuff in there, and I was like, all right, you know, use the sink, and you know, and so now even since then, she still comes to the house and cuts my mother-in-law's hair, you know, and I was like, that is a brilliant way to keep, you know, go door to door, right? I mean, because
it's the house call version, like being a doctor making house calls.
Yeah,
right. Like, yeah.
I mean, like, and then there's another guy who I know that started a complete business over that, and he called it the 911 barber, and he goes to people's homes and cuts their hair, and I'm like, wow, that's the thinking outside the box of being able to keep your business up and running when you can't keep I mean, you got to pay your bills, right? You know, and people can't be shut down. But I just like the idea that people are thinking outside that box of not going, well, okay, I got to shut my salon down now because I can't pay the rent, right?
And John in the chat just brought up a great Napa County, Sonoma County wine country example about people selling high quality wines from wine bars and wines to go, right? Which is a huge. There's a lot of wine here in wine country all over the US as well, and not just wine, but other places too. You can't get those liquors and alcohols in a store because they're very specific to the winery or to the vineyard or to the manufacturer. And so being able to have that kind of at your front door type of service, it's really incredible. Great example.
Yeah, that is amazing, and to be able to get those quality wines that are normally only at the restaurants or only at those boutiques, and be able to get them in other places, that was brilliant. Actually, it's kind of weird that they're allowing alcohol. I went into to a restaurant, got food, and ordered some drinks, and it was all to go, and it was like in a sippy cup, right? Like a alcohol. I'm like driving down the road with 2 cups of basically open container alcohol sitting in my coffee cup holders in my car, and I'm like, this is surreal that I can do this. You know?
We have a bar at our corner where we live, and just down the street about a block away, and they were, you know, it was like punch bowls to go basically. I was like, wow, that's a lot of alcohol to be running around in your car while you temporarily get home. So yeah, it's interesting to see the models that people have come up with. And I think what will be even more interesting is into this year and next year, as the pandemic becomes more normalized, what sticks around?
Right.
Where do we continue to see organizations and businesses find a model that sticks and that they again double down on and continue to move forward with, and you know, where do legal requirements change and kind of help us continue to develop new ways of reaching customers and increasing our capacities as businesses.
In the comments, some people are talking about how in certain areas of the country, driving around with alcohol in your car is normal. Okay, you guys.
I was thinking about New Orleans. I was like, oh, that sounds like New Orleans. But yeah. And other places not so common.
I get walking through Vegas with beers in your hands. That's common. But just driving around with the sippy cup full of beer in my car was a little kind of like, you know, if you pick it up and drink it like a soda, you're gonna. Anyway, Yeah. I love the fact that the people in this industry can find the humor in bad times, and I think it keeps us sane. That's for sure. I want to ask you this one last question. We're really close to the end here, but real quick, how are you working with people and organizations that are on the margins, and what do you do specifically for them to keep them prepared for to keep business open and whatnot during a disaster?
Yeah. I walk organizations through a 3-part framework that really focuses on the people, the place, whether that's physical or virtual. Places still a pertinent part of your preparedness, and the process, how you do business. Going into each one of those elements a little bit deeper and talking about what does preparedness look like and feel like for each organization in those 3 areas, and then building a plan that's not, a 300-page plan, but something that's really tight and actionable so that it can easily be deployed and also built to pivot. So when you develop something and you run it through a testing process or an exercise process, as we call in the industry, and then you see where the point, the pieces are that need to be adjusted, or where you might have some dependencies you didn't know about, and really moving that forward, and then allowing that kind of plan to be shared actively, and really become integral to your organization as you move forward. So it's about having those kind of deeper conversations, not panicking about what crisis looks like or feels like in your organization, but really rooting into the things that are most important to keeping your industry, your organization, your business afloat: people, process, and place.
Thank you so much for your time today, Alicia. For people trying to find her information is in the show notes below, and then you can always find her at her website, which is tolinchpinroad.com. And love to have you on the show again and continue this conversation.
Thanks, Todd. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye. Everybody, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning. And it's great conversation, and it goes way too fast. But like I said, please check her out. It's 2 Linchpin Road. A lot of great information there, working with some wonderful organizations. And I'm looking forward to building more with Alicia in the coming months. Until next time, everybody, please stay safe and stay hydrated. Follow us on, I forgot to tell you, follow us on our social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. And also, we're going to be doing Bullhorn. Bullhorn. Go to bullhorn.fm. Register today. Follow us there. We're going to be switching over to that platform for doing some live stuff and more interactive timing. So Brian would kill me if I didn't do that. Until next time, stay safe and stay hydrated.